Welcome to another edition of Tech Tips, or Beer and Installs, or whatever you want to call it, here at JLT Performance. And today I'm highlighting a couple products that we're going to install on our 2018 Mustang GT. Both of these products are from JLT Performance. JLT has sent us a cold air intake for our 2018 Mustang GT, along with their version 3.0 oil separator, which we'll show you guys how to install. We've been using JLT products on our cars here for many years now with awesome success, so there's definitely a reason why we're going to be installing their products on our new car. Starting off with their oil separator, this is their newest version, a 3.0. This is going to install directly onto your vehicle. It's a plug-and-play system, so there's no hacking up lines or anything like that. They use OEM-style connectors on the end of their pre-bent hoses, and it goes right to the can here. What this is designed for is to catch oil mist that normally recirculates from your engine back through the intake tract and usually gunks up a lot of the intake for you forced induction guys, also ends up on your intercooler. This will actually capture that mist and oil will collect in the bottom here, which you can then unscrew and dump out. The next item we have for you is their cold air kit for the 2018 Mustang GT. This utilizes a 5-inch filter inlet. It's got a 120mm MAF, and they also use this massive 5x8 S&B filter specifically made for JLT Performance. Gotta love that Civil Society Fresh IPA. It definitely helps me out here with these installs. So, now we've gone over exactly what comes with the JLT intake kit. There's something else that you're going to need, and that's the Lund Racing Custom Tune, as this will not work properly on your vehicle without a tune. We offer the Lund Racing Custom Tunes by themselves, with a device, as well as in packages with the JLT intake. Let's go and install this JLT kit. All right, so the first step to installing the JLT intake is going to be removing our strut tower brace. We're using a 15mm socket, and I'll remove the 4 bolts that hold the strut tower brace down to the vehicle. Okay, now that we've removed the bolts, we're going to lift this strut tower brace off. This is the wiring harness that goes to the battery. You do have to kind of move this out of the way to have good access to removing this. Sometimes it's a pain in the as you've seen I struggled before, but let's try it again. The next step, we're going to remove the engine cover here. Using a flathead screwdriver, there's 2 little caps here. We're going to remove those so we have access to the bolts. Simply pry up on it. Now that we've removed those caps, we do have access to the 10mm bolts that hold this cover down to the engine. So I'm using a 10mm socket and extension. Now that we've got the 10mm nuts off of the studs that hold this engine cover on, we're going to pull up gently on this cover and pull it off the vehicle. Now we have access to the engine here. We're going to get this JLT oil separator install out of the way. As you can see on the factory vehicle, there's a couple of hoses here that go from right behind the throttle body to the crankcase, and this is what recirculates the oil mist back into the engine. So what we're going to do, real easy here, on these connectors, they've got a white clip on them. You're just going to push on the clip a tad, and what you'll be able to do then is pull it right off. And it's the same thing over here, and the factory piece is gone. All right, once we got the factory hose off, we're just going to click these OEM style connectors back in the same place that we removed the factory hose from, and the JLT catch can oil separator will mount right there. It's that easy. Moving on to the installation of the intake, there's a couple things that we've got to do to remove the factory intake from the car. We're going to be removing the sound tube. JLT gives you the option to run the sound tube with their intake, however, we're going to be deleting that. You'll also want to remove the air box, the MAF sensor, and also this connection right here at the throttle body. So I've got my tools out, and we're going to go ahead and start removing the sound tube. So we're going to pinch on this connector here. All right, the sound tube has been removed. I'm going to unclip the MAF sensor connector. There's a white clip on the bottom. I'm going to pull it towards the front of the vehicle, pinch on the connector, and it'll slide right off. Next thing, I've got a 10mm socket. I'm going to loosen the bolt here that holds this airbox down to the chassis. Okay, going to remove this from the intake, press on it, just like those other OEM connectors. And now we have access to the nut that holds the clamp and intake together on the throttle body using a flathead screwdriver. And lastly, there is the PCV connection from the driver's side. Crankcase to the intake. We'll pinch on that clip, pull it right off. Okay, we've got everything off of the factory intake. Now we'll be able to pull it out. Going to gently pull off from the throttle body here. Lift up on the back of the airbox. This way you can get the sound tube out here. And there you go, off she goes. Okay, we've got the factory assembly off the vehicle. There's a couple things that we've got to remove from here that will be required to install the JLT heat shield. It's going to be this rubber piece right here. And then this one as well. Pull out the metal first. Push the grommet through the hole. Okay, so we've removed the grommet from the factory airbox as well as the locating spacer right here. I'm going to reinstall the factory grommet into the JLT heat shield. Press it in place. Slide the metal spacer in. And then the locating grommet, I'm just going to drop into the engine bay here where the factory piece sat before. I've also installed their fresh air inlet on the airbox. It's a lot easier to do out of the car than in the car. So let's drop this in. Now we're going to reinstall the factory 10mm bolt on a JLT heat shield to secure it. The JLT heat shield is secure. I'm going to be moving the fresh air inlet back into place. And you want to, actually there's two little clips here on top of the fresh air inlet. You want to set that so that the side of the airbox here is actually in between those two things to hold it in place. Let's push this. We're going to remove the factory MAF from the intake using a T20 Torx bit. And then we're going to reinstall it on the JLT intake tube using the bolts that they supplied as well as the gasket. And do make sure to put the MAF in the correct way, as well as don't over tighten the bolts that hold the MAF to the intake tube. You do not want to bend the ears of this sensor here. This pulls right out. Okay, and as you can see, this side is where the intake, you want it facing towards the filter. That's where the air is flowing into the sensor. Okay, so now we're going to be installing the MAF sensor back into the JLT intake using a supplied gasket. Slide it over, make sure that the bolt holes line up from the gasket to the ears on the sensor. And again, the open side of the MAF sensor faces the filter, which will be over here. I'm going to slide it on in. Use the supplied bolts that JLT sent us for the kit. We're going to tighten it up, and again, be very careful not to over tighten this. You do not want to bend the ears of that sensor. Now we're going to install the JLT silicone coupler reducer onto the intake. This is the portion where it slides over the throttle body. You want to leave these clamps loose so you have some room to play with. All right. And next up, we're going to be putting the filter onto the intake. Slide the clamp over first. And we're going to tighten this, keeping the connection still somewhat loose so that you have room to work with. A couple little tricks that we like to do when installing the air filter onto the tube. There's this metal piece pleated filter portion. You like to keep that metal piece on the bottom side as well as the clamp so it's not visible, just gives a cleaner install. So we'll tighten this up with those two portions on the bottom of the intake so they're not visible. All right, now that we've assembled the JLT intake tube and filter outside the vehicle, we're going to install it. We're going to be sliding this coupler over the throttle body. So let's set the intake down here and get that coupler over the throttle body, sliding it on. That's secure. Now we can actually reattach the MAF connector. JLT provides a little hole in their heat shield here. Push the grommet in, hold it in place, slide the MAF connector on, push the red clip forward, and you're good. Now we're going to tighten up these clamps and move on from there. I'm going to secure the clamp that holds the coupler onto the throttle body using a 5/16 inch socket. Okay, that's secure. And then we're going to tighten up the one that holds the intake to the coupler. Again, do not over tighten these. There's no need to, just make them secure. Excellent. And it's secure. Now we're going to install the foam heat shield insert. Basically what this does is help keep heat out of the airbox. It fits right there. This will seal against your hood once it's down and again keep the engine heat out of this airbox. Okay, as mentioned before, on this car we're going to be removing the factory sound tube. There is a 10mm nut back here where the sound tube meets the firewall. We're going to loosen that nut, pull the sound tube off, and then JLT supplies us with this black plug which we'll put into the firewall. With our install of a JLT intake on our 2018 Mustang GT. We're just about to button this thing up. There's only a couple more things we got to do. I just removed the sound tube. That was a and putting the plug in the firewall. I don't suggest, honestly, it's probably easier just keeping the sound tube, but anyways, I did it. I'm winded. Just got a couple of connections to make here, and we'll button it up and put a Lund Racing tune in it, rock and roll. So I'm going to finish this one up right here. There we go. And that concludes the installation of the JLT cold air intake on our 2018 Mustang GT, along with their catch can here for the oil separator. And we're going to rock and roll, put a Lund Racing tune in this, and see how it does on the dyno. This thing sucks. Yeah. All right. All right. Now we've got the I'm not sure which way to go. We need some red line hood struts. I mean, for real. Come on, guys. Send us a kit. Let's go. Anyways, can you see me? You're like hiding behind. Yeah, totally right. Anyways, moving on with the install of our JLT intake.